In this video, we're going to talk about how to get an action bar to appear on the screen and basically how to deal with the different theming and styling that we're going to have to worry about in order to make sure our application will work well and look good and consistent on both Android 4 and Android 5. So you guys don't have to follow along. I'm just going to go ahead and create an application real fast, and I'm going to call it Action Bar, because that sounds like a good name. Or how about action bars? And I'm going to go ahead and target Android 4.2 and hit next. I will go ahead and start off with no activity. And the reason for that is I want to slowly basically build up to the activity that you would have gotten if you selected blank activity. So I want to select no activity, and I'll hit finish. And I'll wait. Possibly forever, while IntelliJ decides to pop up on one of my monitors at some point. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's over there. You guys can't see it. It's still loading. Just give it a sec. I probably should have paused the video, shouldn't I? But it's so close. Don't you love progress bars? How they kind of like stop at 90%? That's my favorite thing. Okay, here it is. All right, here is our project. It's still gradling. Of course it's gradling. Basically, what's going on here is we have a blank project. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about this project that I need to point out, basically, right now. And it's unfortunate that these things are so intertwined that I'll have to kind of hop between these concepts in sort of a not logical way. But hopefully it'll make sense, or at least you guys will get the general idea. First of all, I need to talk really quickly about project dependencies. We haven't talked about these yet when we talked about the Gradle plugin and how Gradle is used to build our applications. So if you haven't watched that video, Gradle is the build script that builds and compiles our application. It's responsible for all that fun stuff. It's responsible for doing things like testing, deployments, signing our code, doing release debug builds, all that awesome stuff. It's also, as you see down here, responsible for dependencies. So I know all you guys are familiar with the concept of an application referencing another application or referencing another library. In .NET, it would be referencing an assembly. In Java, it would be referencing a jar. Now, the dependencies is basically how Gradle figures out what we're depending on. What libraries are we importing? And in this case, right here, we have two statements. Now, the first statement should actually be fairly clear if you look at it. So remember, this dependencies block is describing to Gradle what things we depend on. Now, the first one, if you really look at it, even if you've never worked with the build script before or never used Gradle or Groovy, it should become a little bit clear. Because if you read it out loud, it says compile, and I guess I'll tell you guys what compile is. Compile means this is a dependency. File tree dir libs include wildcard jar. So basically what this says is any jar matching this file name pattern, wildcard.jar, that is in the libs folder will be imported into our project and used as a dependency. Pretty straightforward. This line is actually irrelevant for what we're doing because we don't have any libs or any jar files in our libs folder. The second one is a little bit more interesting, though. This says compile, and then we have the string here. And the string describes where in a Maven repository. Now, Maven is another build system, but the repository of the repository of Maven was kind of hijacked in Gradle because it's such a ubiquitous thing within the Java world. It's saying import this group or this namespace, this project out of that namespace of this version. And what it'll do is it'll actually jump off onto the internet, grab this jar, this is going to turn into one jar, pull it down, download it, and then reference it in our app, all by including this one line of code, and that's really cool. So what are we including, by the way? Like, it's like, I thought this video was about action bars, not about Gradle and dependencies. Well, what we're including here is actually going to be very, very important through the development of our action bar. And it has to do with support libraries. Now, support libraries are an awesome and awful thing at the same time. Basically, it all boils down to the fact that Google likes to introduce new cool stuff on every API revision. So every time a new Android operating system comes out, Google's like, hey, here's some awesome stuff. Now, that's pretty cool, but Google also is like, well, it'd be really awesome if previous versions of Android could use these new features, because you guys know how Android adoption rates are going. Like right now, what's Lollipop at? 1% adoption. And the same thing with KitKat when it came out. So Google's like, well, people are still releasing applications that target older Android operating systems. So what we need to do is we need to fill in the gaps, right? So we introduce these awesome new features. We need some way to allow developers to use these features in older versions of the operating system. That is a support library. So COM Android Support is a group of a bunch of different support libraries that we can use that allow us to use features of versions of Android that we otherwise couldn't, because we're not targeting the right version of Android. So what we have right here on the right-hand side is this right here, AppCompat v7. So what is AppCompat? Why are we importing it? And what does that have to do with action bars? Okay, so a little history lesson again. Action bars were introduced in Android 3, Honeycomb. Remember that tablet-only Android operating system? Not many people used it, really, because it only worked on tablets. And so action bars came out in Android 3. It was a really awesome new user interface paradigm, but Google wanted to backport it to Android 2. Google wanted action bars to exist in Android 2 as well, so they introduced the AppCompat library, the action bar compatibility library. And what the action bar compatibility library lets us do is it lets us use the action bar for devices that are before Honeycomb, before 3.0. So I probably bet everybody has a question right now. And that question is, we don't care about devices before 3. In fact, we don't even care about devices before 4. We care about 4 and onwards, right? Because I couldn't imagine the horribleness of having to maintain an application targeted at Android 2. And there's really no need to, I don't believe, for greenfield applications anyway. If you really have to, it's not the end of the world. But anyway, the point is throughout this video series, we're targeting 4. Why are we importing something that is compatibility library for before 3? The answer has to do with material and theming and Android 5. So basically, there is an action bar implementation that exists within the operating system of Android. It's an action bar implementation, and it's completely usable. It's within the operating system itself, within the SDK itself, and we can use it, and everything is awesome. But the problem is that when Material came out, when the new Material design language thingy came out that Google put together for Lollipop, Google wanted to be able to also bring some of the features and some of the look and the feel of Material, and they wanted to also allow people who were developing for before Android 5 to have that same look and feel. So that if you were to develop an application that targets both 4 and 5, it'll look consistent between 4 and 5, and you won't have to default to using a nasty old Holo theme. Holo is going to be the theme that most Android 4 applications would be using. So what Google did is they hijacked the AppCompat library for that purpose. So what they did was they were like, so I guess instead of introducing a new support library, we're going to hijack the AppCompat library so that if you use the theme that comes from the AppCompat library, the AppCompat theme, it'll look very similar in Android 4 and Android 5, instead of there being either a discrepancy, or instead of you having to maintain one set of activities that use the Material theme and another that use the Holo theme, or write some nasty code to switch between the two and it'd be ugly and the world would end. So instead they introduced one library that'll handle both. And they hijacked AppCompat. So what I'm saying is that we can't use the built-in Android action bar if we want to be able to design our applications so that they look very visually similar in Android 4 and Android 5. That was a really long-winded explanation. I could have probably just summed it up with that one statement, but I really wanted you guys to understand the history behind that, and particularly why I really, really don't like the support libraries, or at least how Google is handling them. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the support library version of AppCompat. We can't use the Android operating system version we are going to use a support library version. And that's going to require some non-obvious method calls and all that fun stuff. And we're basically going to ignore the fact that at all a built-in version of the action bar exists. We're going to be completely 100% concerned with the action bar that comes from the AppCompat library and nothing else. So yeah. So let me go ahead and just really quickly show you guys an example of what I mean about all this stuff, and just a visual example of exactly how close we can get Android 4 and Android 5 to look. So what I'm going to do here is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create an activity, and I'm not going to take advantage of the AppCompat library right now. So I'll leave the dependency in there, but for now, pretend that the AppCompat library does not exist. Basically, I want to show you guys what happens if we don't have it and we're not using it. So I'll go into Java, my Java folder, and I'll open up my package right here, my Combuzz action bars. I'll right-click, select New, Class, and I'm going to just type in main activity. Again, I don't expect you guys to be following along with this particular video, so I'm not going to be too slow, or I'm actually not doing well typing today, so maybe I will be slow enough anyway. Anyway, we have a main activity. It has a activity, or it extends activity. We're going to have a public void onCreate bundle saved state, super onCreate saved state, and then we'll go ahead and set content view r.layout.activity main. So I'll go ahead and create a layout resource file, and let's have it be a linear layout, I guess, whatever. I might change that in the future. I just want to show you guys an example of a button in a text box and a edit text. So we'll have a button with a layout with the match parent, layout height wrap content text. I am a button. And then we'll have a text view with a wrap parent, match content text. I am text. And then we'll have an edit text with a wrap content, match parent, and we'll give it a text or a hint of edit me. Okay, so we have our three elements. Maybe we'll give each one of them a little bit of margin. So 18 dp for that guy, margin 18 dp, and for this guy, margin 18 dp. All right, so the last thing I have to do here is I have to figure out why that's not working, because I mixed up my width and height, didn't I? Because that's how good I am. I also mixed that up too. Height should be wrap content, width should be match parent. Okay, so we have our three controls that we're going to take a look at how differently they're styled depending on what we do with our themes, because we haven't yet talked about themes yet. And I just want to let you guys know, or make you guys aware of what themes are, because it's really important to understand with how the action bar works. So I have to jump into my manifest anyway to add my main activity as an activity. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Android manifest, and inside here, I'm going to go ahead and put in an activity and reference my main activity. And of course, I'm going to give it an intent filter with a action of main and a category of launcher. So again, if you guys aren't aware, this makes this activity the main activity, the activity that'll be launched when you click on the launch activity button. Anyway, so that is our activity, but there's something else that's important about this particular manifest, and that is something that you guys may or may not have noticed in the past. If you look up here, we have a theme, Android:theme, which is specifying a theme for our entire application. So basically that theme is set to be the default theme for our, well, the entire application. I just repeated the same sentence twice, but it's important. There's another thing you can do. You can override your themes on a per activity basis. So if I were to say theme, I could put in a different theme here in my main activity. But that's not, I haven't really needed to use, oh, actually, there are a couple cool things you can do with that. We'll see examples later. The point is, anyway, what are we looking at here? So, style theme. Now you notice there's an @ symbol, which should make you think resource. So it's a resource, and it's pointing to something that's defined in a different file. It's pointing to a style. Styles and themes are the same kinds of things, but they're semantically different. We'll get into that later. Basically, you can think of a theme as a collection of values, a collection of variables that define the look and feel of your application. And there's quite a few of them that you can overload yourself in order to make Android look in the way that you want it to. There's also these themes that you can kind of extend that will be a default set of these different visual elements. Anyway, so if I jump into theme, notice what I did there. I held down Control and I clicked on this resource, right? And where this took me, it took me to my styles.xml file, which, if you guys recall, is under the resource folder, values, styles.xml. And so now we see we have a style here named app theme, and it has a parent theme. It's extending the theme AppCompat light dark action bar. So yeah, that's exciting, I guess. So basically all it's doing is it's saying the app theme is whatever customizations we have plus whatever's defined in the theme AppCompat light dark action bar. So I'm going to remove that because we will see an example of that near the end of this video when I come together and show you exactly why it's important to understand how to work with Lollipop in the context of Android 4. What I'm going to do here is, so I have a theme. What would we have before? So before we have this AppCompat library, before we had to deal with wanting our Android 4 to look like Android 5, what would we put here? Well, generally something like Holo. So if I do Android : and hit Control space, we see we have a theme.material and also a theme.holo. So let's try material first, actually, because material is something that we want. We want our applications to follow the design philosophy that Google laid forward called material design. That's a big thing with new application development. And you'll notice we get an error here. We get the error that says theme material requires API level 21. I actually wonder if that's a runtime or compile time error. I actually never checked that out before. It's me failing as an instructor. I should know that off the top of my head. I do kind of want to see this application run, though, on my Lollipop. Ooh, it's a runtime error. It's not a compile time error. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of my emulators. I did that by clicking on one and then shift down arrowing to the next. And I'll say use same device for future launches. And what we're going to get is, well, this time it's not an error at all. That's interesting. We get Holo over here, and we get material over here. Oh, was that an error? Nope. So it looks like what happened is on the left-hand side on our Android 4 device, that defaulted to the theme that's kind of default in the operating system, which in the case of Android 4 is going to be Holo. So we have our button and our text and our edit me. On the right-hand side, we have a material design. And we see it's material because it just looks better. And also there's cool things like this ripple effect. Like notice how when I click on this button and hold down, there's this cool little ripple. Also, it's the same thing applies to this edit text box too. So that's really cool. Also notice that in material theme, we no longer have an icon in our action bar. Okay, so that's that. Also, by the way, this is using the native action bars. This is not using the support action bars. So that's interesting. However, that's typically not what you would want to do because we have Holo working on one and material working on the other. Because basically what you can do here is to get rid of this little lint warning, you could do this. You could say this app theme extends from Holo, and then I could right-click values, select new, values resource file, type in styles, scroll all the way down to version, add that as a qualifier, and type in 21, which version 21 is Lollipop, and hit OK, which basically creates me a new styles file that will be used on Android 21 or above, and the old styles file, which will be used for everything else. Then what I can do is I can manually specify that I want to use material. So now this is the proper way. If you really wanted an Android 4 to use Holo and Android 5 to use material, this would be the proper way of doing it. So we have one that uses Holo and one that uses material. And if we hit play, we'll actually get the exact same results either way. One will be Holo, one will be material. So one will be ugly and one will look cool. So yeah, that is our. Actually, I don't want to knock Holo too much. Holo does actually look pretty cool, but material just looks 10 times better. Anyway, So that's how we specify our app theme. That's how we can specify a different theme depending on what version of Android that we're on. However, there's one more thing you could do. I'm going to go ahead and delete the specific styles. I could go ahead and specify this and leave this as hollow, which means it'll look hollow in both Android 4 and Android 5. So I can go ahead and hit play. I wish the feedback loop was a little bit faster, but it's definitely better than the built-in emulator. And now you see they both look completely identical. However, that's not what I want. Like I said earlier, what I want, what my goal is I want to have one look as close to material as possible on Android 4, and then to use native material on Android 5. That's what I want. I want the application to look modern, no matter what device you're using. How do we do that? Well, like I said earlier, it was rolled in, that feature, that concept was rolled in to the AppCompat support library. And how do we use the AppCompat support library? There are two steps in order to use it. First, we have to change our parent theme to be the thing that we had when we generated the project, which is, not surprisingly, AppCompat. So base.theme.appcompat. Then what we got to do is we have to jump into our activity, and instead of extending activity, we need to extend action bar activity. Now notice the namespace here. Action bar activity comes from the android.support.v7.app namespace. So it comes from that package that we included in our dependencies in our Gradle build file. Now when I hit enter, of course, we'll have an import statement at the top. Now that I've done those two things, I can go ahead and hit play. And for the first time, what we're going to see is we're going to see both of these screens look as close to each other as possible. Okay, so they definitely look close. Obviously, there's going to be some cases where they're not quite the same, with the exception of some elements that are not currently styled using the AppCompat library. I will point out that the AppCompat library for backporting from material is still under development. It's not like it's a beta release or anything. It just happens that it was, I get the impression it was kind of shoved out the door. So a couple, not all widgets are going to be supported. We have our edit text, and we have our text, and we have our action bars that are all going to be very nice and materially, but buttons, for example, are not going to get the same treatment. Now, of course, you are completely capable of going in and styling buttons however you want, in addition to making custom buttons for whatever purposes you have. So just bear that in mind, there will be a discrepancy with buttons. You'll also notice that there's no ripple effect. So when I click on this button or this edit text, notice how there's no ripple effect. But when I click on this button or this edit text, there is that ripple effect. That's because Android 5 introduced a new a thing called render thread, which is basically a way to do high performance animation. And that doesn't exist in Android 4. In order to do the ripple effect in a cost-effective or performant way, you would need that feature, and Google decided not to implement that feature on devices that don't support the more optimized way of doing rendering. Anyway, that is basically themes. That's basically how we deal with AppCompat and how we get an action bar in. Now, another thing that's really important is this action bar is now not the native action bar. This is an AppCompat action bar. Now, why do I keep on differentiating between the two? Well, we'll see later when we actually try to reference the action bar itself. I want to go ahead and leave this video on one note, and that is we have a couple options with AppCompat, just like our other libraries. I also want to remove that base dot. I want it just to be theme.appcompat. That's the actual theme that we want to use. Anyway, there's a couple variations of most themes you can do in Android. So for example, I could do theme.appcompat.lite. If I hit play, and wait a year, we now have a light. Now this looks a whole lot closer to material. Anyway, so we also have AppCompat.light and .dark action bar. So if I hit play, remember how like when we were in our messages window, the messages window had a light background, but it had a dark action bar. So that's what you're seeing here. We have a dark action bar at the top, and we have light controls in the middle. All right, so that's really exciting. I guess that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, we will finally go in and start talking about how we can put buttons on our action bars. And we'll see you then.